The mysterious visitors, far beyond Earth, in the cold emptiness of space, a group of alien beings moved swiftly toward a small blue planet. These aliens came from various corners of the galaxy, each with their own reasons for seeking the truth about humans. Their mission was simple: to understand why humans had avoided war for so long, despite their violent past. For centuries, the galaxy had witnessed the rise and fall of many civilizations. Some fell into darkness due to endless wars. Others were destroyed by their own greed and hunger for power. But Earth was different. Humanity, known for their history of violence and conflict, had somehow managed to avoid destruction, and for the most part, had lived in peace. It was this strange truth that puzzled the aliens. How could a species that had once been so violent choose peace over war? What was it that made humans so unique? The alien visitors, known as the Tellurians, were a race of beings who had studied countless worlds. They were curious, intelligent, and relentless in their pursuit of knowledge. But Earth's peace baffled them. The Tellurians had always been fascinated by the history of war and conflict, especially since they had never experienced a true war on their own planet. They had lived in harmony for centuries, but they couldn't comprehend why Earth's species had chosen peace over war. Was it a strategy? Or was there something more, something deeper that humans understood? As the Tellurian ship entered Earth's atmosphere, it became clear that they were about to witness something extraordinary. The ship touched down in a remote part of the world, far away from human cities. There, they were met by a human diplomat named Zara. Zara was a calm, thoughtful person, known for her ability to explain even the most complicated aspects of human culture and history. She was chosen to meet the visitors because of her deep understanding of Earth's past, and she was ready to share humanity's story. The Tellurians were prepared for anything. They had researched Earth extensively, learning about its violent history, its wars, and the ways in which humans had fought amongst themselves. What they didn't expect, however, was the peaceful and welcoming environment that Zara and the Earth officials presented to them. The alien travelers had come expecting to see an aggressive, war-hungry species, but instead they were greeted by people who were calm, hopeful, and eager to share their experiences. Zara welcomed the visitors and invited them to sit in a large round meeting room. The walls were covered with holographic displays that could show anything from the rise of Earth's early civilizations to the most recent technological advancements. The Tellurians were impressed by the technology, but their minds were focused on one thing: finding the truth about why humans avoided war. "We know of your history," one of the Tellurians said, his voice calm but filled with curiosity. "We have seen the destruction, the violence. How is it that, despite your past, you have chosen peace?" Zara paused for a moment, carefully considering her words. She knew that the answer wasn't simple. She couldn't just tell them it was because humans were inherently peaceful, because that wasn't true. Humans had fought wars for resources, power, and survival. Yet there was something deeper, something more complicated that had allowed them to survive and avoid complete destruction. "Human history is filled with struggles," Zara began, "but it's also filled with resilience. There were times when it seemed like we would destroy ourselves. We fought each other with all our might, and many believed that war was our destiny. But something happened, something unexpected. We realized that we couldn't survive if we continued down that path. The choice to choose peace came from within us, and it became stronger with each passing year." The Tellurians listened closely, their eyes filled with interest. They had never heard anything like this before. From their perspective, peace was a state of mind that only a few enlightened beings could achieve. But humans had managed to make peace a way of life. Zara continued, "It wasn't just one event or one leader that made this choice. It was a slow process, a series of events that led humanity to realize that peace was the only way forward. We made mistakes, many of them. But we learned from them. We learned that war only brought destruction, pain, and suffering, and we made the decision to change." The Tellurians exchanged glances. They had seen many species make similar decisions, but none with the same level of success as humans. Most civilizations had failed, falling back into their old ways of violence and war. But Earth was different. There was something in the human spirit that had driven them to change, to evolve. "Can you show us how this happened?" one of the Xalorians asked. "What changed in your society that made you choose peace?" Zara nodded, knowing that the aliens were ready to learn more. She motioned to the holographic display behind her. As it lit up, scenes of human history began to unfold, from the ancient battles between tribes to the world wars that nearly destroyed the planet. The Xalorians watched as Zora explained each event, highlighting key moments when humanity could have gone down a darker path, but instead chose a different route. "There were moments when humanity was on the brink of complete destruction," Zara said softly. "But we didn't give up. We found a way to pull back from the edge, to rebuild, and to choose a better future. It wasn't always easy, and it wasn't always fast. But in the end, we chose to live in peace." The Xalorians were silent for a long moment, processing what they had just learned. They had come to Earth seeking answers, and now they understood that the real reason humans avoided war was not just because they were peaceful by nature, but because they had chosen to be. They had learned the hard way that war was not the answer, and now they were living proof that peace was possible, even for a species as chaotic and violent as humanity. As they looked out at Earth's blue skies and peaceful landscapes, the visitors couldn't help but feel awe. They had come to Earth seeking the secrets of peace, and now they were about to learn something that would change their view of the universe forever. Humanity had done the impossible, and the Xalorians couldn't wait to learn more. The unraveling of the past. The Xalorian visitors sat in silence, their minds racing as they processed everything Zora had shared. The peaceful, hopeful atmosphere of the meeting room was a stark contrast to the images they had seen on the holographic display: ancient wars, widespread destruction, and near extinction. How could such a violent species choose peace? It seemed impossible. And yet, Zora's words hung in the air like a promise. Humanity had found a way, not only to survive, but to thrive in peace. The head of the Xalorian delegation, a tall being with translucent skin and glowing blue eyes, spoke up. His voice was calm, but his words were filled with urgency. "You say humanity chose peace, but how did this happen? What forced you to change your ways?" Zora glanced around the room, her gaze steady. The question had been asked 1,000 times before, but it never lost its weight. The history of how humanity chose peace was complex, woven with moments of despair and flashes of hope. It had not been a singular moment, but a gradual evolution. She leaned forward and began. "Let me show you something that will help you understand." The room darkened slightly as the holographic display shifted. A new image appeared, the face of a human leader, a man named Martin Leclerc, standing in front of a crowd during the darkest days of war. The year was 2047. And the world had been on the brink of annihilation. Nations were at war, and humanity's future was uncertain. The devastation had already begun. Cities lay in ruins, and millions of lives had already been lost. Zora paused. This was the turning point. Martin Leclerc was not the first to see the horrors of war, but he was the one who managed to change the course of history. The Xalorians leaned in closer, their curiosity growing. "What did he do that made the difference?" one asked, their voice full of wonder. Zora smiled softly, though the memory was a painful one. He didn't fight back with weapons or force. He reached out for something that humanity had nearly forgotten: compassion. The hologram flickered, showing Leclerc standing before the wreckage of a devastated city. He wasn't holding a weapon. He held a flag. The flag was a symbol of peace, a call for humanity to unite and stop the violence before it consumed them all. He spoke to both his own people and to the enemy forces that were still holding on to the hope of victory. He spoke of the futility of war, of how every life lost was a life that could never be replaced. The Xalorians were speechless. They had seen countless leaders rise to power in times of crisis, but most had chosen the path of war, believing that strength was the only way to survive. Leclerc, on the other hand, had chosen peace, not out of weakness, but out of a deep understanding of humanity's survival. It was a choice that had not been popular at the time, but it had sparked a chain of events that no one could have predicted. Zara continued, her voice steady. The speech Martin Leclerc gave that day was the spark. It ignited a global movement. People began to question why they fought. Was it worth the destruction? Was there a way to live without constant conflict? They realized that war only brought pain, and that peace was not just the absence of war. It was the presence of something greater, unity. The hologram shifted again, showing the gradual rebuilding of society. It wasn't just governments that were changing. People, everyday humans, began to change their mindset. Schools taught children about the horrors of war, but they also taught them the importance of communication, negotiation, and understanding. Militaries were dismantled or reformed, focusing on defense and peacekeeping rather than aggression. People started seeing each other as equals, Zara explained. It wasn't just about stopping war. It was about understanding the value of every human life. The foundation of peace was built on respect, empathy, and cooperation. And it all started because one man, standing in the ruins of a war-torn world, had the courage to say no. The Xalorians exchanged glances, absorbing the weight of what Zora had said. They had always believed that the key to peace was in the hands of the few, the enlightened ones. But this was different. This wasn't about a single leader's vision. It was about humanity as a whole coming together, realizing that they were stronger together than apart. But it wasn't easy, was it? One of the Xalorians asked. How did humanity stay on this path after so many years of war? Zara's face softened with a knowing look. It wasn't. There were setbacks, of course. There were those who resisted the change, who believed that war was in our blood. But humanity was united in a way it had never been before. Every generation that came after Martin Leclerc took up his cause. The fight for peace became a fight for the future, a fight that every human, from the poorest to the wealthiest, could believe in. The display shifted again, showing the rise of peaceful alliances and treaties between nations, with images of leaders shaking hands, signing agreements, and working together for the common good. It wasn't just words on paper, it was a new way of life. The world had been reborn, not through war, but through understanding. Zara looked at the Xalorians, who were now visibly moved by the story. You see, it wasn't that humans were inherently peaceful. It was that they had learned from their mistakes. They had seen the cost of war and realized that there was no victory in destruction. Peace wasn't a choice they made once. It was a choice they made every day. The Xalorians stood in awe. What they had witnessed on Earth wasn't just a story of survival. It was a story of transformation. It wasn't about avoiding war out of fear or weakness. It was about choosing something better, something more powerful. Peace. As the meeting room grew silent, the Xalorians knew that their mission was far from over. The truth about why humans avoided war was only the beginning. There was still much to learn. But one thing was clear. They had found a planet unlike any other. A planet where peace wasn't just a dream. It was a reality. And as they looked out the window at Earth's serene landscape, they couldn't help but wonder, could their own worlds follow in humanity's footsteps? Could peace be achieved not just on Earth, but across the galaxy? It was a question that would linger with them long after they left the planet, a question that would shape the future of their civilization. The shifting mindset. As the Xalorian visitors listened intently to Zora's story, they couldn't shake the feeling of awe and disbelief. The idea that an entire species, one as powerful and resourceful as humanity, could choose peace over war was almost incomprehensible. In their own cultures, strength and domination had been seen as essential for survival. But here, in the story of Earth, they were hearing about a species that had chosen something completely different, something that, at first, seemed impossible. After a long silence, The Xalorian leader spoke again, his voice full of wonder. But Zara, you say humanity chose peace. But how did they continue this path? How did they avoid falling back into conflict when so much of their history had been defined by it? Zara nodded slowly, her face thoughtful. She had heard this question before, and the answer was never simple. The path to lasting peace was not paved with ease or quick solutions. It had required dedication, sacrifices, and an ongoing commitment from every generation. But it had been the only way forward. She began again. The change didn't come overnight. After Martin Leclerc's speech, humanity didn't just stop fighting. There were still struggles, rebellions, and disagreements. But something fundamental had shifted. The idea that war was the only answer to conflict began to fade, and people started to believe that they could solve problems in ways that didn't involve violence. The Xalorians were intrigued. They had always viewed conflict resolution as something that was won through sheer power or domination. The concept of finding peaceful solutions was not part of their culture. So, you're telling us that humans didn't need to rely on military force to maintain peace? One of them asked, their voice full of doubt. Zara smiled gently, understanding their confusion. Yes, over time, humanity began to develop new systems based on dialogue and cooperation rather than force. One of the most important shifts was in education. The world's schools taught future generations not just about history and mathematics, but about empathy, communication, and the value of life. They started teaching children how to resolve disagreements without violence, how to listen, and how to work together. The holographic display shifted again, showing scenes from Earth's educational system. Children in schools were seen sitting in groups, discussing their differences, and learning to negotiate solutions. The lessons were not just about academic achievement, but about creating a culture of understanding. Zara continued, it wasn't just about changing the way people thought. It was about creating a system where peace wasn't something that could be easily broken. Governments were restructured. The military, once the cornerstone of many nations, was no longer an instrument of aggression. Instead, it became a peacekeeping force, focusing on maintaining order and protecting vulnerable populations. The Xalorians exchanged uneasy glances. The concept of a military force that existed solely for peacekeeping was foreign to them. In their civilizations, the military was the ultimate symbol of strength, and peace was often a temporary condition, always threatened by the potential for conflict. How did humans prevent war after all of this? Another Xalorian asked. Surely there were forces who still desired power or domination. Zara's expression grew more serious. Yes, there were those who resisted change. Even in the new world that humanity was building, there were still people who believed that war was the only way to achieve their goals. But the people of Earth had seen the consequences of war firsthand, and they were unwilling to go down that path again. She paused, the weight of her next words heavy in the air. The most important change was in the way humans viewed themselves. No longer were they separated by borders or ideologies. They saw themselves as one species, bound by the same struggles, the same hopes, and the same desire to survive. When the stakes were high, when the future of humanity itself was on the line, humans chose unity. They chose peace because they understood the alternative: self-destruction. The room was silent for a moment as the Xalorians absorbed this information. They had known of the Earth's history, its wars, its conflicts, and its bloody past. But they had not known this side of the story, the side where humanity had chosen to rise above its darkest instincts and create something better. But how did they manage to stay united? The Xalorian leader asked, leaning forward, eager for more. In a world filled with so many different cultures, ideas, and beliefs, how did they avoid splitting apart? Zara nodded, a knowing smile crossing her lips. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, of course, but what kept them united was the shared belief in the power of peace. Over time, humanity developed new technologies that allowed them to communicate across vast distances, to work together in ways that had once seemed impossible. Global problems, such as poverty, disease, and climate change, became the focus of collective action. No longer did humans see these as isolated issues. They saw them as problems that could only be solved together. The hologram displayed scenes of Earth's recovery from environmental destruction. People worked side by side, rebuilding forests, cleaning oceans, and advancing technology that helped repair the damage they had caused. There were no borders, no walls between them. Just people, working for the greater good. Zara turned back to the Xalorians, her voice filled with conviction. What I'm telling you is that peace was not a single event for humanity. It was a constant, a way of life. It was built on the lessons of the past and a deep understanding of what it meant to be truly free. The Xalorians were deep in thought, their minds grappling with the magnitude of what they had just heard. They had been to countless worlds, seen countless civilizations, but none had achieved what humanity had achieved. Peace, not through conquest, but through understanding. It was a concept that seemed almost too perfect to be true. As the discussion continued, Zara knew that the Xalorians would leave Earth with more questions than answers. But perhaps, just perhaps, the lessons humanity had learned could spark change in the galaxy. If the people of Earth could choose peace after all they had been through, maybe, just maybe, the rest of the universe could follow their example. The unlikely catalyst. The room was filled with the hum of quiet conversation as the Xalorian delegation absorbed the full extent of Zara's narrative. She had spoken of humanity's struggle, its turning point, and its transition to peace, but there was still one question left hanging in the air. What was the true catalyst? What event or series of events had finally driven Earth to abandon its violent history in favor of unity? Zara could sense the curiosity building among the Xalorians. They were still struggling to reconcile the humans they knew, fierce, unpredictable, and brash, with the peaceful civilization she described. She knew they were searching for a single moment of clarity, something they could point to as the spark that ignited the shift in humanity's mindset. But the truth was far more complicated. It wasn't one thing, Zara began, her voice steady. It was a series of events, each building on the last, leading to a moment where humanity saw what they were capable of becoming. The Xalorians exchanged uneasy glances. It was hard for them to understand that a series of smaller incidents, rather than one defining event, had triggered such monumental change. In their cultures, it was the great battles, the decisive victories, that made history. This was something different, something subtler. Zara continued, her gaze drifting to the holographic images that danced on the table in front of them. The catalyst, as you put it, came after humanity's most devastating conflict, a war that nearly wiped them out, a war they had started themselves. The Great Collapse, as they called it. The war was brutal, relentless, and left the Earth in ruins. It was a war of ideologies, of greed, and of pride. But in the end, it was also a war that revealed the emptiness of violence. It showed humanity the consequences of unchecked aggression, of choosing war over dialogue. The room fell silent. The Xalorians had read about Earth's history of war, but hearing it from Zara made it feel more real. The weight of it was palpable, a reminder of how fragile peace truly was. Zara paused, letting the gravity of her words sink in before she spoke again. After the war, the survivors, those who had lived through the worst of humanity's nature, began to ask themselves why they had chosen war in the first place. What was it all for? They realized that the true cost of war was not just the lives lost or the cities destroyed, but the destruction of something far more precious, their future. One of the Xalorians leaned forward, his face filled with interest. But how did they convince everyone to change? Surely, not everyone wanted peace. What about the factions who still believed war was the answer? Zara nodded, appreciating the complexity of the question. That's where the second catalyst came in. After the war, the survivors formed new alliances, not just among governments or powerful leaders, but among ordinary people. They came together in support of rebuilding not just the Earth, but the future of humanity itself. These people were the ones who started to build the systems of peace, systems that prioritized understanding, communication, and cooperation. The Xilorians listened intently, but there was still doubt in their minds. How could such fragile systems stand against the forces of power and destruction? Zara could see the skepticism in their eyes. She smiled slightly, recognizing the challenge in her words. The truth is, peace wasn't always easy for humanity. Even after the Great Collapse, there were individuals, factions, and even nations who resisted change. They believed in the old ways, ways that had brought them power and control. But the majority of people, the ones who had seen the horror of war firsthand, chose to stand up for something better. It was a long, difficult fight, but it was a fight for the future. And that was a battle they were willing to wage with everything they had. The holograms shifted again, showing scenes of Earth's post-war rebuilding. People worked together to clear rubble, rebuild cities, and create new systems of governance. The images were powerful, each frame a testament to humanity's resilience. Zara looked back at the Xilorians, her expression firm. The most important thing the humans realized after all of their conflicts was that peace was not something given to them by others. It was something they had to build for themselves. And to do that, they had to change. They had to let go of their old ways and embrace something new, something bigger than themselves. One of the Xilorians, visibly moved, asked, "But how did they find the strength to rebuild after such devastation? How did they find hope again?" Zora's eyes softened as she answered, "It was the people, the ones who survived, that gave humanity hope. They understood that to build a future, they had to leave the past behind. It wasn't just about rebuilding what had been destroyed. It was about creating a new world, one where war was no longer the answer." And that belief, that shared vision of a peaceful future, became the driving force that united humanity. The room was quiet once more as the Xilorians processed the depth of Zora's words. They were beginning to understand. Humanity had not chosen peace because it was easy. They had chosen it because they had seen the horrors of war, and they had understood that peace was the only true way forward. Zara could see that the Xilorians were starting to understand, starting to grasp the magnitude of what Earth had accomplished. The galaxy had always thought of Earth as a death world, a place of danger and destruction. But the humans had shown them something different. They had chosen peace, not because it was simple, but because it was the only way to secure their future. The Great Debate. The Xilorians were quiet, their minds working over the information Zara had just shared with them. They had expected to learn about Earth's downfall, about how war had consumed the planet, but what they hadn't expected was to hear about how humanity had, against all odds, rebuilt itself. But there was one part of the story that still troubled them, one question that had not been fully answered. How did humanity avoid the mistakes of their past? How did they overcome the temptation of violence when it was so deeply ingrained in their history? Asked Arl, the chief diplomat of the Xilorian delegation. He had been silent for most of the conversation, but now his voice rang out with a quiet urgency. Zara knew this was the hardest question. It wasn't just about the physical destruction humanity had endured. It was about the deep-seated mindset that war had once fostered. It had been more than a series of bad decisions. War had been woven into the very fabric of human history, and to cast it aside would require an enormous shift in how they thought and acted. They didn't just avoid the mistakes of the past, Zara said, her tone thoughtful. They had to actively confront them. The survivors of the Great Collapse realized something critical. They could not afford to repeat the same patterns. If they did, the future would be even worse than the past. It was a harsh lesson, but it was one they learned together. The room fell silent as the Xilorians processed this. There was no grand battle to destroy the violent tendencies of humankind, no single hero who had rallied them to peace. Instead, it was a collective realization, an understanding that violence only led to destruction. But could the galaxy, with its long history of conflict and competition, do the same? Zara continued, sensing the gravity of the moment. The key to humanity's success was not just in building new institutions or even in their technological advances. The key was in their transformation of the human spirit. They had to learn to see the other side, not just as an enemy, but as a partner. They had to see each other and the universe with new eyes. In the aftermath of the war, they found new meaning in cooperation. They began to understand that there was strength in working together, in finding common ground. But how? Arel pressed. After so much conflict, how could they ever believe in peace again? Zara gave him a solemn look, her voice steady. It wasn't easy. There were those who resisted. There were factions that still believed in power through violence. But the majority of humanity, the ones who had lived through the Great Collapse, had seen firsthand what unchecked violence could do. And that sight changed them. She paused for a moment, as if considering her next words carefully. Humanity learned to value life in ways they hadn't before. They realized that in the end, survival wasn't just about defeating your enemies. It was about preserving your future. When they saw the consequences of their own aggression, they understood that to protect their children, their communities, and their world, they needed to find a different way. And that way was peace. One of the Xalorians, Jay, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. And what about the factions? The warlords who still had power and influence? Surely, they didn't just disappear. Zara's face tightened slightly, remembering the dark days of Earth's recovery. No, they didn't just disappear. There were factions that tried to seize power, that tried to drag humanity back into war. But over time, they were isolated, not through violence, but through diplomacy, negotiation, and sometimes by simply showing that peace worked. Those who tried to cling to the old ways found themselves increasingly irrelevant. The people, ordinary people, built something new, something that made war feel unnecessary, even foolish. The room grew quiet again. Zara's words hung in the air, and she could see the Xalorians struggling to comprehend what she was saying. Their own society had been built on the principle of dominance, of the strong ruling over the weak. How could they understand a society where peace was the true measure of strength? Arel, the chief diplomat, spoke again, his voice filled with disbelief. You're telling us that Earth survived, not through the power of its military or its weapons, but through its ability to choose peace. Zara nodded. Exactly. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. But the shift from violence to peace required humanity to redefine what power meant. They had to recognize that true strength wasn't about destruction. It was about building, about creating something that would last. As she spoke, Zora could sense the Xalorians beginning to shift their perspective. They had come to Earth expecting to learn about the dangers of war, but now they were hearing something far more profound. They were hearing about humanity's journey to understand that war, while a part of their past, was not their future. There is something else, Zara said, leaning forward slightly. As Earth began to rebuild, humanity realized that peace wasn't just about avoiding war. It was about making the active choice to connect with others, to learn from each other, and to protect not just their own, but everyone. The Earth they rebuilt was one where peace was the foundation, not just of their relationships with other humans, but with the very world they lived on. Jay's eyes widened with realization. So in the end, humanity didn't just avoid war. They embraced peace as their true path forward. Zara smiled. Exactly. And that is why they are no longer the dangerous, unpredictable species the galaxy once feared. They are a species who has learned the hardest lesson of all. The strength to destroy is easy, but the strength to build a peaceful future is a far greater power. The Xalorians sat in silence, each of them processing what they had heard. They had come to Earth expecting to find a planet filled with violence and chaos. Instead, they had uncovered a story of redemption and transformation, one that would change how they viewed humanity forever. The galaxy had always thought of Earth as a dangerous place, but now they were beginning to understand the true strength of its people. The galaxies begin to take notice. The conversation had lingered on the Solarian delegates' minds for days. The more they thought about Zora's words, the more they realized how Earth's story was one that could reshape their view of the universe. To the Solarians, a race of warriors and conquerors, peace was a strange concept. The strength to defeat an enemy was honored in their culture, yet Zora had painted a picture of a human race that had used a different strength altogether. Now, gathered in the conference hall, the Solarians stood before a holographic map of the galaxy. Stars and planets blinked softly in the darkness of space, and the Solarians discussed their next steps. But their thoughts kept drifting back to the humans on Earth. Arel, the chief diplomat, turned to Zora. You said humans built something new, something that made war seem foolish. But what was that something? What did they do that made them so different? Zora stood at the head of the room, her gaze distant as she considered her response. She had spent years studying Earth's history, the wars, the peace treaties, and the rebuilding. Now, standing before these Solarians, who came from a civilization that saw strength only in battle, she realized that humanity's strength wasn't just about their survival. It was about their capacity for change. They built connections, Zora said, her voice steady. Connections not just with each other, but with the universe itself. After the collapse, humanity learned to look outward, not just inward. They understood that if they wanted to thrive, they needed to share resources, knowledge, and ideas with others. Peace wasn't just a means to avoid destruction. It became the foundation of progress. Arel's brow furrowed in confusion. But what does that mean for the galaxy? If Earth has changed this much, how do we know it's not a trick? A false peace meant to lull us into a false sense of security. Zora met his gaze, the weight of history in her eyes. That's what you need to understand, she said quietly. Humanity doesn't just make peace for survival. They make peace because they value it. It's not a tool or a weapon. It's a way of life. Their peace isn't weak. It's the strongest foundation any civilization can have. And they know that the only way forward is together. Ja, the youngest of the Solarians, spoke up. So, Earth has truly changed. They're no longer the threat they once were. Zara nodded. They've changed, but it wasn't easy. It took generations to get to this point. They had to learn from their past, from the wars they fought, from the destruction they brought upon themselves. They had to rebuild not just their cities, but their entire way of thinking. And now, they are a model for peace, a model the rest of the galaxy could learn from, if it's willing. The Solarians exchanged glances, unsure of what to think. Peace had never been the answer for them. For centuries, their civilization had prospered through conquest, their warriors gaining power with every victory. The idea of living in peace with other civilizations seemed like an impossible dream, a weak and naive notion. But Zara's words had begun to plant seeds of doubt. What do you think the rest of the galaxy would say if they knew the truth about humanity? Zora continued. What if they saw humans as something different from the dangerous, chaotic species they believed them to be? Arel's eyes narrowed as he pondered her words. That's a dangerous question, Zora. The rest of the galaxy won't believe it easily. They'll have to see it for themselves. Zara smiled slightly. That's true. But there's one thing that the galaxy might not expect. Humanity is already out there, exploring the stars, extending their hand in peace, and they're ready to show the galaxy just how powerful peace can be. The Solarians looked at one another, unsure of what to think, but deep inside, they couldn't ignore the feeling that Zara's words were planting a seed of possibility. Could a species that had once known nothing but conflict really change? Could the galaxy be on the cusp of something new? Something beyond war? Perhaps it's time for the galaxy to listen, Arel finally said, his voice softer now. And when they do, Zara added, they'll learn that true power doesn't come from destruction. It comes from understanding, cooperation, and trust. Humanity is ready to teach the galaxy that lesson. The room fell into silence. The idea of peace as a weapon was a hard one to swallow, especially for a people like the Xalorians who had known only war. But something in Zora's voice had struck a chord, and for the first time, they wondered if it was possible to believe in a future where peace was not just a distant hope, but a powerful reality. The galaxy at a crossroads. The Xalorians had always believed that the strength of a species was measured by its capacity to conquer and dominate. But Zora's words had left an impression. The seed of doubt had been planted, and the seeds of something much larger were beginning to sprout. The question now was not whether humanity could change, but whether the rest of the galaxy was ready to embrace that change. Zora stood in the quiet of the council room, the soft hum of the holographic projections in front of her casting long shadows on the floor. Behind her, the vast expanse of the galaxy sprawled across the wall, distant stars twinkling like forgotten dreams. She had spent years advocating for peace, for understanding. But now, she realized that peace wasn't just about avoiding war. It was about preparing for something bigger, something better. A chance for the galaxy to evolve, to move beyond the cycle of endless conflict. She had already seen the first ripple of change. The Xalorians, long a race of conquerors, were beginning to question the very core of their beliefs. They had been reluctant to accept peace as a viable option, yet Zora could see in their eyes the beginning of transformation. If humanity could be the example that led to this change, then maybe, just maybe, the galaxy could find a path to salvation. But there was still resistance. The rest of the galaxy wasn't ready to embrace peace yet. They still saw war as an inevitable part of survival, a necessary tool to keep balance and ensure power. And the Xalorians, despite their curiosity, were still wary. Peace was a concept they had never truly known, and it was difficult to let go of centuries of tradition. Zora turned to Arul, the chief diplomat. His eyes were still filled with uncertainty, but there was a flicker of hope in his gaze. "Do you truly believe the galaxy is ready to follow humanity's example?" she asked. Arul took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "I don't know, but I believe we can start by listening. We've been fighting for so long that we've forgotten how to listen. Perhaps the time has come for us to stop fighting and start learning." Zora smiled. "That's the first step." The conversation shifted. What was once a dialogue about humanity's survival now had the potential to reshape the future of the entire galaxy. The Xalorians began discussing ways to introduce humanity's message of peace to other races, slowly at first, carefully, testing the waters to see if the other species would be open to such an unprecedented shift. Zora knew this would take time. Change never came easily, especially when generations of history told a different story. But she believed that humanity had proven something no one else had. Peace wasn't weak. It wasn't naive. It was powerful. Across the galaxy, on countless worlds, alien leaders and diplomats were meeting to discuss the growing influence of the human message. What started as an isolated phenomenon on Earth was now reaching far beyond the planet. Some were skeptical, dismissing the idea as foolish. But others were intrigued, questioning if the time had come to put aside old grudges and unite for the greater good. Zora stood before the council once more, this time not just as a human advocate for peace, but as a symbol of hope. She had shown the Xalorians that peace could be more powerful than war, that a different kind of strength existed beyond violence. And though there was much work ahead, she could see the first cracks in the old system of conquest. "The galaxy stands at a crossroads," Zora said, her voice steady. "We can continue down the path of destruction, or we can choose a new way, a way that values life, understanding, and cooperation over power and domination. It won't be easy, but humanity has shown that change is possible. We have proven that peace is not only possible, it's essential." Arul looked out at the galaxy, the vast expanse of stars stretching endlessly before them. For the first time, he saw something more than just the battlefields. He saw the potential for a galaxy united in peace, a galaxy where cooperation replaced conquest. "We've been blind," Arul admitted. "We fought for so long, we never thought to look for another way. But maybe you're right, Zora. Maybe the time has come for us to listen, to see if humanity's path might be the path for all of us. Zara nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of hope and determination. This was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but humanity had taken the first steps, and now the galaxy was beginning to listen. There was still resistance, but that was to be expected. Change was never easy. Yet, for the first time in history, the possibility of lasting peace seemed within reach. And humanity, with its unyielding belief in the power of peace over war, might just be the catalyst that transformed the entire galaxy. The galaxy was at a crossroads. The question was no longer whether peace could work. It was whether the galaxy was willing to embrace it. And in that question lay the future. The choice was now in their hands. And as Zora looked toward the stars, she knew one thing for certain. Humanity was ready to lead the way.